It was the middle of winter, and the Rocky Mountains were blanketed in a thick layer of snow. As a travel blogger, I had visited many remote places, but this cabin was by far the most isolated. Nestled deep within the mountains, miles from the nearest town, it promised the perfect retreat to write about winter getaways. I had come alone, planning to spend a quiet weekend surrounded by nature, documenting the serene beauty of the snowy wilderness. The first night in the cabin was uneventful. I spent the evening by the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate and reading a book. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the occasional crackle of the firewood. I felt at peace, content in my solitude. But then around midnight, I heard a distant howling. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but as the howling grew louder and more distinct, I realized it was something else. Wolves, I thought, remembering the ranger's warning about wildlife in the area. I shrugged it off, telling myself the cabin was safe and secure. I locked the doors and windows and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh layer of snow outside. The landscape was pristine, untouched, and beautiful. I decided to take some photos for my blog. As I stepped outside, I noticed something unusual: large footprints in the snow, leading from the edge of the forest to the cabin. They were too big to be human, and too irregular to be from any animal I knew. A chill ran down my spine. Could it have been a bear? But bears hibernate in winter, don't they? Unease settled in the pit of my stomach, but I brushed it aside, deciding to stay vigilant. I spent the day exploring the area, taking photos and notes for my blog. The day passed without incident, but the sense of being watched never left me. That night, the howling returned. It started as a low, mournful wail and gradually grew louder, closer. I tried to ignore it, burying myself under the blankets, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the night. I heard creaking, as if something heavy was moving outside the cabin. In the morning, I discovered more footprints around the cabin, and something else: deep, claw-like marks on the wooden door. Panic set in. I tried to start my car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I was stranded, alone, with no way to contact the outside world. The nearest town was too far to reach on foot in the snowstorm that had begun to roll in. As the day wore on, the storm intensified. The wind howled, and snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. I retreated inside, barricading the door with furniture. I could feel eyes on me, watching from the tree line. I kept glancing out the windows, expecting to see something, anything, but there was only the swirling snow and the dark shapes of the trees. The night fell hard and fast. I had never experienced darkness so complete and suffocating. I decided to light a few candles for a sense of security, but the flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls. I felt a cold draft, colder than what the storm outside could produce, and realized the back door was slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I approached it, every step feeling like a lifetime. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but the impenetrable blackness of the night. I quickly shut it and secured the lock, my mind racing with possibilities. Was someone out there? Was it an animal trying to get in? Then I heard it, a scratching sound, faint at first but unmistakable. It was coming from the front of the cabin. I tiptoed to the window, peeking through a tiny gap in the curtains. My breath caught in my throat. There, just beyond the porch, stood a figure. It was too dark to make out any details, but its silhouette was unmistakable against the snowy backdrop. The figure stood still, almost statuesque, as if aware I was watching. Then, as if sensing my presence, it turned and disappeared into the woods. I was paralyzed with fear, clutching the curtain, my mind reeling. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a hiker lost in the storm, seeking shelter. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I spent the next few hours in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. The scratching returned, this time from the back door. I grabbed the kitchen knife, my only weapon, and inched towards the sound. The noise stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that felt more oppressive than the howling wind outside. The storm raged on, and I knew I couldn't stay another night. I had to get out. I remembered the satellite phone in my emergency kit. With shaking hands, I managed to send a distress signal. The wait for a response felt like an eternity. I stayed huddled in the corner of the cabin, every nerve on edge, listening to the relentless scratching and the eerie howling. Hours later, just before dawn, I heard the distant sound of a helicopter. Relief flooded over me as the search and rescue team arrived, breaking through the storm to reach the cabin. They found me terrified, but unharmed, and quickly evacuated me to safety. Even after returning to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The authorities found no trace of any animal or person near the cabin, and the footprints were attributed to a possible bear, though I remained unconvinced. The experience left me deeply unsettled, and I never wrote about that trip. The memory of those nights, the howling, and the feeling of unseen eyes watching me haunted my dreams long after. To this day, I avoid isolated places, especially in winter. The Lonesome Lodge remains a mystery, a chilling reminder of what can lurk in the remote corners of the world. The weather forecast had warned of a severe snowstorm, but I thought I could beat it. I was driving home late from work, taking the isolated stretch of road through northern Michigan. The road was usually deserted at this hour, and as the first flakes of snow began to fall, I sped up, hoping to reach home before the storm hit full force. I was about halfway home when the blizzard arrived, sudden and fierce. The snow quickly became a blinding white wall, reducing visibility to almost nothing. My car's headlights barely penetrated the thick snow, and the road seemed to vanish beneath the accumulating drifts. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. Despite my cautious driving, my car skidded on a patch of ice and slid into a snowbank. I tried to accelerate, but the tires spun uselessly. I was stuck. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed my coat and gloves and stepped out into the freezing night. The wind was howling, and the snow stung my face like tiny needles. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I assessed the situation, realizing I needed to dig my car out. Thankfully, I had a small shovel in the trunk. As I started to dig, a sense of unease washed over me. The road was completely deserted, and the storm had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien, inhospitable world. As I worked, I noticed a shadowy figure standing just beyond my car's headlights. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was motionless, watching me. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette against the snow. I called out, asking if they needed help, but there was no response. Suddenly, the figure turned and vanished into the storm. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I wanted to believe it was just another stranded motorist, but something about the way they moved, their silence, unnerved me. I continued digging, my heart pounding, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. I finally managed to clear enough snow to free the tires, but my relief was short-lived. When I got back into the car, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The backseat door was ajar, and there were wet, icy footprints inside the car. Someone or something had been inside while I was out digging. Panic set in. I slammed the door shut and locked all the doors. My hands were shaking as I tried to start the car again. Miraculously, the engine roared to life. I hit the gas and the car lurched forward, skidding slightly before gaining traction. I drove as fast as I dared, the headlights cutting through the snow. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I saw the figure again, standing in the middle of the road, watching me. Then the storm swallowed them up, and they were gone. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my driveway. Even then, I sat in the car for several minutes, the engine running, the doors locked, trying to calm my racing heart. I eventually made it inside, where I double-checked all the locks and turned on every light in the house. The police were skeptical when I called to report the incident. They suggested it was a stranded traveler or a prank, but their reassurances did little to ease my mind. I knew what I saw, and the memory of those icy footprints inside my car still haunts me. For weeks after, I avoided driving at night, especially during snowstorms. The fear that someone or something was watching me from the shadows lingered. The Snowbound road, once a routine part of my commute, had become a place of dread, a reminder that even the most familiar paths can hide unknown terrors. To this day, I never drive in severe weather if I can avoid it. The experience left a lasting scar, a reminder of the night I came face to face with an unknown presence on that lonely, snow-covered road. The storm had been brewing all day, but it wasn't until I was driving up to the farmhouse in upstate New York that the blizzard truly hit. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and snow began falling in thick, heavy flakes. By the time I reached the farmhouse, visibility was almost zero. I parked the car as close to the house as possible and hurried inside, carrying my weekend bag. I had agreed to house sit for my friend Sarah, who had inherited the old farmhouse from her grandparents. It was a beautiful, rustic place, but far too isolated for my taste. Sarah had assured me it would be a peaceful weekend, perfect for catching up on some reading and enjoying the snowy scenery. I wasn't so sure anymore. The storm outside was getting worse by the minute, and I felt a pang of anxiety as I locked the door behind me. The house was warm and cozy, a stark contrast to the raging blizzard outside. I made myself some tea and settled in the living room with a book. The silence was comforting at first, but as the night wore on, it started to feel oppressive. The wind outside seemed to be getting louder, and I could hear it whistling through the cracks in the old windows. Around midnight, I heard a tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just a branch hitting the window, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I put down my book and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from the back of the house. I told myself it was just the wind, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way to the back door. The tapping stopped as I approached, and I peered out the window into the darkness. I couldn't see anything through the swirling snow. I shook my head, chiding myself for being paranoid, and returned to the living room. As I sat back down, I noticed something strange. The back door was slightly ajar. I was certain I had locked it when I came in. My heart started to race, and I quickly went to shut it, making sure to turn the lock firmly this time. I stood there for a moment, my breath visible in the cold air seeping through the gaps, listening for any sound, but there was nothing. Just the relentless wind and the creaking of the old house. I decided to go to bed, hoping the storm would pass by morning. I double-checked all the doors and windows before heading upstairs to the guest bedroom. The bed was warm and inviting, and I buried myself under the blankets, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I must have drifted off to sleep because I was jolted awake by a loud thud. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The house was silent again, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I got out of bed and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. As I opened the bedroom door, I heard another sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering. I crept down the hallway, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. The whispering grew louder as I approached the living room. I steeled myself and stepped into the room, the flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the middle of the living room floor, there was a large, wet footprint. It wasn't mine, and it certainly wasn't there before. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. I followed the trail of footprints, which led to the back door. It was open again, the lock hanging loosely from the frame, as if it had been forced. I felt a surge of panic. Someone had been inside the house. Someone, or something, had been watching me. I quickly shut the door and ran to the kitchen, grabbing a large knife from the drawer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to it. I decided to call the police, but when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. The storm must have knocked out the lines. My cell phone had no signal either, leaving me completely cut off. I felt trapped, my mind racing with fear. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the living room, the knife clutched in my hand, my eyes darting to every shadow and flicker of movement. The whispering returned intermittently, growing louder and more insistent, but I couldn't understand the words. It was as if the storm itself was speaking to me, taunting me. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the storm finally started to ease. The wind died down, and the snow stopped falling. I felt a glimmer of hope, but the fear remained. I knew I had to get out of there. I gathered my things quickly, keeping the knife close by. As I was about to leave, I noticed something chilling. Outside, in the fresh snow, there were more footprints. They circled the house, coming right up to each window, as if someone had been watching me from every angle. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the implications. Whoever, or whatever, had been out there had been observing me the entire night. I hurried to my car, the snow crunching under my boots. As I reached for the door handle, I felt an icy grip on my shoulder. I spun around, knife raised, but there was no one there. The sensation had been so real, so cold, that I couldn't believe it was just my imagination. I jumped into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The drive back to the city was harrowing. The roads were still treacherous, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following me. My mind replayed the events of the night over and over, the whispering voices, the wet footprints, the feeling of being watched. When I finally reached the safety of my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion and relief washing over me. I called Sarah and told her everything, but she was skeptical. She suggested that the storm and isolation had played tricks on my mind. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had been out there. For weeks, I was plagued by nightmares. I saw the figure in my dreams, standing outside my window, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of an icy hand on my shoulder still lingering. I moved back to the city, refusing to house sit for anyone again. The memory of that night stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Even now, on cold winter nights, I sometimes hear the wind howling and feel a shiver down my spine, as if the icy embrace of that night is still reaching out for me.